Imagine America before America existed. No cities, no highways, no farms, no borders, just an enormous continent covered with glaciers, forests, rivers, and grasslands, where mammoths and other Ice Age animals moved across the landscape. And somewhere in this enormous world, tiny groups of humans were walking into the unknown. They didn't know they were entering what would eventually become one of the most important places in human history. They were simply looking for food, water, and a safe place to survive. But here's the mystery. Who were these people? How did they get here? And what happened to them? For a long time, historians had a simple answer. The earliest widely recognized culture was called the Clovis culture, named after archaeological discoveries near Clovis, New Mexico. Clovis sites date to roughly 13,500 years ago, and their distinctive stone points were found across huge parts of North America. For decades, this created a powerful story. Humans entered North America around the end of the Ice Age, moved south through an opening between massive ice sheets, hunted large animals, and rapidly spread across the continent. It was neat, it was simple, and it was wrong, or at least far too simple. Then archaeologists began finding something that changed the entire story, evidence older than Clovis. In Oregon, researchers found evidence at Paisley Caves dating to more than 14,000 years ago. In Florida, evidence associated with a mastodon has been dated to around 14,500 years ago. And thousands of miles farther south, at Monte Verde in Chile, archaeologists found evidence of human settlement dating to roughly 14,500 years ago. Think about that for a second. If humans were already living at the southern end of South America more than 14,000 years ago, they couldn't have just arrived in North America a few hundred years earlier and casually walked all the way down. Their journey had to begin much earlier. And that creates the first big mystery. How did they travel so far, so fast? One possibility leads back to a world that doesn't exist anymore. During the Ice Age, sea levels were much lower than today, exposing a huge region between Siberia and Alaska known as Beringia. It wasn't simply a tiny bridge connecting two countries. It was an enormous landscape where humans and animals could live and move. Groups could have entered North America from Northeast Asia and gradually expanded into new territories. But there was a problem with the traditional story. The famous inland ice-free corridor between the Great Ice Sheets may not have been usable by the earliest migrants when they needed it. Archaeological evidence south of the ice sheets predates the period when that corridor appears to have become a viable route. So scientists began considering another possibility, the coast. Imagine traveling along the Pacific edge of the continent thousands of years ago. Instead of trying to cross enormous glaciers, small groups could potentially move along coastal environments, using marine resources and stopping wherever food and fresh water were available. Some researchers have proposed that coastal migration may have played an important role, although direct evidence is difficult to find because Ice Age coastlines are now underwater or dramatically changed. And that brings us to one of archaeology's biggest problems. The ocean may be hiding the evidence. During the Ice Age, sea level was dramatically lower. Coastlines that ancient people may have traveled along are now underwater. Imagine finding a campsite from 15,000 or 20,000 years ago, but instead of being buried beneath a field, it's sitting beneath the Pacific Ocean. Archaeologists can't simply dig there like they would on land. So the oldest chapter of the American story may be partly hidden beneath the sea. But then something even more surprising appeared in New Mexico. At what is now White Sands National Park, researchers discovered fossilized human footprints preserved in ancient lake sediments. Some dating studies place the footprints between roughly 21,000 and 23,000 years ago, potentially making them far older than the classic Clovis timeline. If those dates are correct, then humans were already walking across what is now the United States during the height of the Ice Age, thousands of years earlier than the traditional story once suggested. But scientists have also debated aspects of the dating, which is exactly why archaeology is fascinating. A discovery doesn't automatically end the argument. Researchers test it, question it, test it again, and look for independent evidence. And imagine the scene those footprints could represent. A shallow lake, mammoths moving across the wet ground, children running or walking near the shoreline, adults gathering food. Someone steps into the soft mud. The footprints remain for a moment, and then the landscape changes. The lake dries. Sediment covers the tracks. Thousands of years pass. The people are gone, but their footprints remain. And eventually, scientists discover them. But now comes the question that sounds simple and is actually incredibly complicated. What happened to those first Americans? Did they disappear? Not necessarily. The phrase first Americans can make it sound as if there was one mysterious tribe that arrived, lived for a while, and vanished. Reality was probably much more complicated. Human populations moved, mixed, adapted, and changed over thousands of years. Some groups may have contributed ancestry to later indigenous populations. Some ancient populations may have left little detectable ancestry in living populations. Cultures could disappear, even while people continued living in the same region. They encountered giant animals that are now extinct: mammoths, mastodons, giant ground sloths, and enormous Ice Age bison. But around the end of the Ice Age, many of these giant species disappeared. Scientists continue to debate exactly how much was caused by climate change, ecological transformation, and human activity. There wasn't necessarily one single explanation for every animal and every region. The world itself was changing. Temperatures were shifting, glaciers were retreating, plants were spreading into new areas, animals were changing their ranges, and humans were adapting alongside them. The first people entering the Americas weren't looking for fame. They weren't trying to become the subject of history documentaries. Wood rotted, clothing disappeared, camps were buried, rivers changed course, coastlines moved, organic materials decayed, entire landscapes were transformed. What remains is only a tiny fraction of what once existed. That's why archaeology can feel like detective work. Scientists aren't looking at the complete story. They're looking at fragments. A stone tool here, a footprint there, a burned piece of bone, a campsite buried under layers of soil, ancient DNA preserved in the right conditions. And from those fragments, they try to reconstruct a journey that began thousands of years before anyone wrote it down. There wasn't one simple first American moment. The peopling of the Americas was a long, complicated process involving movement, adaptation, and population change. The old Clovis first story helped scientists understand part of that history, but discoveries from places such as Monte Verde, Paisley Caves, Florida, and White Sands forced researchers to reconsider the timeline. And we may still be missing enormous pieces of the puzzle. Somewhere beneath the ground, another campsite could be waiting. Somewhere beneath the ocean, an ancient coastline could contain evidence of a forgotten journey. Somewhere beneath layers of sediment, another set of footprints could be preserved. And one new discovery could change the timeline again. Because when we ask what happened to the first Americans, the answer isn't that they simply vanished. Their story continued through generations of people who adapted to this continent, built communities, created cultures, and carried knowledge forward. What disappeared was the world they knew. The glaciers melted, the giant animals vanished, coastlines changed, landscapes transformed. But the human journey continued. And perhaps that's the most incredible part of all. Thousands of years ago, a small group of humans looked at an enormous unknown continent and took the next step forward. And today, we're still trying to follow their footprints.